All right, hello everyone. I know there's a few of you waiting, so thank you very much. I'm Chris, I'm the Atheist Pastor. Welcome to a bit of a special chat that I'm having today. I've got Alexandra Marshall with me, and I've done my usual
Hello, everyone.
trick. I've done my usual trick there. I didn't mute myself, so I'm getting myself in my ear, so I've just had to fix that. So Alexandra is a political commentator, has contributed to Sky News, Spectator magazine, Penthouse magazine. I'll probably let Alexandra go over a bit of her background and who she is. But today's conversation it's a conversation that I try and have as often as I can. And that's that there are a lot of different viewpoints within the atheist world and the atheist community, because there's a lot of people who I encounter who come into the atheist community and think that that it's very much a groupthink scenario. So I'm hoping that this conversation might be one that'll show that there is a lot of different points of view out there. So Alexandra, welcome. Thanks for coming on the channel, first of all. And if you just want to give a bit of a background on who you are and what you do.
Thank you very much for having me. Well, my story isn't that interesting. As far as religion or my work, basically, I was raised as secular. My parents didn't really have any interest in religion, although my dad did run some of those Christian camps for a while, but he walked away long before I was born. And I went to a Anglican school, a private school, like so many, and got into a world of trouble on a regular basis for not being religious, but not the kind of trouble that you would imagine. It was things like they would set us an essay on the history of religion, and they would get an essay, not what they were hoping for. That sort of thing is what I got into trouble for. Put it this way, I never got asked to speak in chapel. I had all my notes ready. There was a whole group of us. We had everything ready to go, and they never asked us.
So you think they might have been a little bit concerned about the opposing viewpoint?
Yeah, I think they might have known what was going to happen if we were invited to speak. But so it wasn't really a particular religious upbringing, I would say, other than just the general. You attend the churches as part of your class. You sit through it. I learned how many bricks there are on the back wall. But I've always been interested in the history of religion and the evolution of religion. So I've spent more than a decade just randomly researching how one religion moved into another religion, because I like the old ruins and things, and I love ancient history and all the ancient wars, and I love that. And religion is so closely tied, you can't help but start to learn about the ancient religions they go through. So that's sort of my religious background, which is minimal. But as for who I am, I have worked in the retail world for a long time, trained as an engineer. I do computing work, so I design artificially intelligent software programs to solve problems in the retail industry, which sounds quite boring, but things like your pick and pack systems or your stock management systems that have to do human decisions, but as a computer. Stuff like that. Done all the stock, negotiations with Westfield. I've got a lot to say right now, you will have noticed, to do with the whole retail dying thing, because it's my whole world. It's my profession. But yeah, and I started writing. So I've always been a writer, and now I'm being published. But my first love was writing and art. So I've sort of come back full circle to what I actually like to do, rather than what I have to do.
Yeah. So how are you finding, I guess, so obviously a lot of the writing you do is very political in nature. So I guess to cover that, I mean, I came across you, I think it might have been on, I think either Daisy Cousins had retweeted you or you'd commented something, and I sort of thought, oh, okay, and ended up following you, and a lot of the content I thought, okay, yeah, I agree with a lot of this stuff. Not everything, but
That's bad. I'd be worried if you did.
I know. Well, it's one thing I hate is groupthink. So it's where everyone just agrees, and it does my head in. But anyway, we'll definitely come back. So I guess
it's anti-conservative to be part of groupthink. I mean, the difference between conservative followers and the followers of the left is conservatives will question their leaders if they think they are wrong. They won't just fall behind them. And I think it's such an important part. I can't stand that there's a few conservatives now who are demanding that other conservative followers be quiet if they think that there is a serious problem with the solution. That seems to me to be completely against the nature of what it is to be a conservative.
And I guess that's where I guess this gets interesting, because it's I'm someone who I openly identify as being centre-right conservative, depending on the issue. I don't necessarily buy into the whole political scale, because I think you can be far right on one thing, far left on another thing, and centre on everything else. But
it's a law of averages.
Yeah, but generally, you know, it's no secret that I'm a member of the Liberal Party, and certainly I would fit into the right side of politics as far as everything goes. But I found myself to be a little bit of I thought I was a bit of an anomaly. I know certainly when I first came into the atheist community, I was bombarded with, if you're to the right of Bernie, you know, you're a horrible person. So that was my initial feeling in, and since coming out as a conservative atheist, I've been inundated with so many messages from people who feel the same. And one thing that surprised me, and I often make the assumption that most people on the right are religious, and it was actually a tweet that you put out at Easter, which was, what's a heathen to do over Easter? And I thought, okay, didn't see that one coming, and it obviously led to the conversation.
Yeah, I use that term heathen jokingly, as I'm sure you're aware. I am secular. I say that I'm a secular humanist, because humanism is my philosophy, and it's only a vague attachment to it. But when you deal with people who are used to a religion, it's often better to rope in a philosophy along with your no, I don't subscribe to that, just to help identify you. I've always said that religion, politics, and philosophy are the same thing. They come from the same place in humanity, and you express them in one of these ways. It's why religion can sometimes interact heavily with politics, and why philosophy can do the same thing, and vice versa. You always have to have a society and a person with at least one of those three things together. It's also why you can drop one of them as well. You can have completely non-political people, completely non-religious people, completely non-philosophical people, but they will all have at least one of those things to ground them. What were you asking again? I forgot about being religious on Twitter. Okay.
Yeah, I guess it was my misconception, but I was probably going to lead into
paganism. I'm not pagan.
No, that's all right. So from
I said I'm a farmer, so technically from the Roman standards, that's why we joke about it, because I'm on a farm. So we have the big Easter moon rising, and so we just joke about being pagans, but we're not.
So you sacrifice the goats on the altar and everything like that?
Oh, definitely. No, we sacrifice people like Oakshot. We have little political sacrifice. I'm kidding. I'm 100% kidding.
I know, Oakshot's still running around. Come on, you haven't done a good job there. So obviously you're someone who doesn't sit on the political left. I think it's very fair to say. How would you identify your political views, or where do you stand on in general?
I have not moved my political views for a long time. I am a centrist libertarian with conservative leanings depending upon the topic. So I am a free speech activist, which would tend historically put me on the left. But most of my economics are conservative economics, although when you talk about free speech, it has traditionally been the conservatives who have championed the legislation of free speech, if you go back through American and English history. So I think the left kind of stole that we're free speech champions thing when they're really the height of censorship. So that's why I don't identify with them at all that way, because I think they stole that idea of being free speech champions from conservatives. But yeah, I'm a centrist libertarian with conservative leanings depending upon what the topic is.
Okay, so how have you I guess found, because obviously there's probably not so much in Australia. I know in America, religion and politics are ridiculously intertwined. They're almost, you can't have one without the other.
Not just America.
Yeah, true, but it's probably not so much in Australia, although there is certainly that element. There is a big part of that element here. How have you found navigating, I guess, through your political beliefs and obviously the conversations you have, because you've got a fairly decent Twitter following. How have you found navigating that with so many people who do have that religious viewpoint and I guess are hoping for that religious representation?
Well, to be absolutely fair, I get most of my trouble from the feminists who hate that I am a female conservative. So they take up the majority noise that I receive on Twitter. And then I get the people who hate that I'm a female conservative. My gender is far more of an offense to them than my religious persuasion. So I get almost no kickback for being a conservative, secular person on Twitter or in politics. My American followers are, I think they're basically aware that I'm secular, but again, I'm not coming after religion unless it starts to interact with politics. And usually if I ever talk about religion in politics, it's to preserve both. So I'm sure that you and I actually disagree on the validity of the religious discrimination bill that Porter has written. I think it's terrible, like pretty much everything that he's ever written. He's just so terrible at writing policy. I can't explain how awful he is at doing it. So that's when I generally wade into the debate. You'll see me far sooner wade into a debate about, for example, Islamic politics interfering with politics of the Western world, because that is a political system. So if religion is not in politics, or it's not committing any grand atrocities, live and let live. I don't really bother with it. I'm interested in it, but it's not like part of my engagement in politics. It's not to put forward a religious or anti-religious view. That's my sort of
very much that libertarian sort of standing on people can do whatever they want so long as it doesn't interfere with the greater good.
Well, correct. Exactly the point. I think that I understand, although I don't have it myself, I completely understand that a large percentage of the population will always require or seek religion. So there's no point trying to wage any kind of ideological war against them. It's just pointless. It's part of human civilization and society. You can make the argument, have the discussion when it comes up, which I find fascinating, but unless it's being destructive, which it has in history and it will again, I'm sure, then I don't really mind. Yeah.
So as far as you mentioned the Religious Discrimination Act, and that's something I've actually had a bit to say on, and probably picked a few fights within the atheist community on. You mentioned that you think we might disagree. Well, I guess what is your stance on it? What's your opinion on the Religious Discrimination Bill, or the version that we've got at the moment?
I'm just going to get the obvious fact out of the way, which is that we should not have infringements on our speech. We should copy the American model, enshrine the freedom of speech to protect everyone's speech, and just deal with it that way. That's my basic ground point standing. But so that will get rid of things like 18C, which also shouldn't exist as a concept. But my biggest beef with the Religious Discrimination Bill is that it was designed to solve a very particular problem, and that was the overreach of corporations into the private life of citizens. The fact that it was over Folau's religious opinion is a minor detail. The actual problem itself had nothing to do with religion. It was about overreach through the internet into private areas of the internet from an employer. And just to give you some context, I've seen it all the time in retail, where you'll have a staff member who posts something on their private Facebook account or their private Twitter account, and then they can suffer kickback from their employer for what they're posting over there. Now, it's the same problem as Folau, although it's not publicized, but it's exactly the same underlying problem.
Yeah.
So in order to solve...
I was just going to say, for those who aren't aware, Israel Folau he's an Australian rugby union player, or was an Australian rugby union player, who got himself in a bit of trouble. I've got and I have done a few videos on Folau before, but just for those who are international, he posted a religious quote saying that a list of things, drunkards, atheists, and anyone who was gay would be going to hell, and it caused a bit of outrage. Refused to take it down. Lost his job. There's talk it was a breach of contract, but that being said, he ended up with a fairly hefty payout, but he probably handled it in a pretty piss poor way, even though technically and legally he may have been in the right. So just for anyone who...
Fair work probably would have ruled in his favour, which is, so...
Oh, definitely would have.
But he stumbled over and he made very public a common and long-standing problem that ever since the internet has come into being and social media has been a thing, corporations have been trying to police the speech of those who work for them. So the first thing that Porter should have done is assess the difference between, basically the whole internet on social media, of what the corporation owns in social media and what it does not, what is still considered to be the public forum. And there's been absolutely no work done by our politicians on the birth of the internet and ensuring that people are protected and their freedoms are protected. So to be clear, if someone had in work hours posted something, then that would probably be subject to discipline. If they had gone onto a website that was owned by the company, so the company's Facebook page, and started writing things on the company's Facebook page, again, I would say fair play. That is the company's property that you're playing with. If they go onto their personal space, it's no different than going down the pub and having a chat with your mates as far as what we should consider the law to be. And what corporations have done is try to tell you what you can and can't say when you're outside the work environment. Now, Christian Porter's law does not address this problem between the employer and the space of the internet and regulating the internet space to protect freedom. That is not what he's done with this. In fact, he's actually made the problem worse. So I'm pretty sure the reason Folau was paid out is because if you read the religious discrimination bill, it allows employers who couldn't before to sue their employees if they can prove they've had a financial damage from their comments. Now, before that was put into the legislation, Fair Work would have won that case for Folau. They would not have been allowed to pursue it. So they've actually made that problem solidified into law, which I have a serious problem with. I think an employer should be able to come into your private spaces and go, you know, you can't say that on your private it's not correct. The other thing I don't like is if you read it, the gist of many paragraphs is that it invites the law and lawyers to judge what they think is a valid or non-valid religious opinion. And the moment you start inviting legal systems to rank the validity of religion, that's no good for religious people or irreligious people. You know, you either protect everyone's free speech or you don't. You can't start making judgments on what is fair and non-fair speech. There's the law, you can do what's legal, or you can speak freely. So
obviously I agree with you in part there. I know that and only because I've dealt with a lot of retail contracts employing people, what you do see is there is a social media clause in there in a lot of these contracts now, and I believe the issue
which are not legal. They're not legal. You can't sign some. No, Fair Work says you can't sign people up to those contracts. You can write them, but you can't enforce them.
Because my understanding is there's something that because essentially when you put something on social media, you're publicly publishing the same. And this is probably where the laws are antiquated or haven't caught up. But my understanding is, and look, I'm not a solicitor. I don't necessarily understand that.
It's been tried a couple of times and failed.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, but yeah, I think it's fair to say. Look, I think Israel Folau was a dope in the way he handled it.
No kidding.
And then doubling down and saying what he said at church. Mind you, you go into any church in the country, and you can pick a little piece of what they say and blow it into a big offensive story. I think
anything on your Sunday school at all it just wouldn't look good in print. Which is exactly why the lawyers should have gone, no way are we getting into this space, because you can't, once you look at individual people and what they say, you can't start making a business accountable for the private thoughts of people. It's just going to end in disaster. I think the biggest mistake a business ever made was to decide that what their employee said represented them as a company. No one asked them to do that. No one assumed that. They decided to take the responsibility themselves.
So to throw, I guess, another example and using, and it's slightly shifting, but I guess what people are doing within their own public spaces. So there was 2 Bulldogs players who, are you aware of the story there, that got sacked for...
I don't know anything about football. I'm going to be flat up honest. I know nothing about, not a thing.
Great. So I'll paint the scenario for you here. 2 Bulldogs players got fired just before the season kind of started for having a couple of younger girls back to their room that they'd met. It turns out they were schoolgirls, consenting. I think one of them was aware that it was a 17-year-old girl. The other one wasn't aware, and they both lost their jobs. By the same token, does that fall into the same what's happening in someone's public life?
Well,
how would you reconcile that?
Speeches and actions are different things. So we have a general view as a Western civilization that speech is our enshrined freedom and protected, because it's how we value our ideas and it's just our philosophy as Western civilization that we have associated our freedom to speak as being a fundamental freedom. So what you are actually describing is an action. So first of all, I'd say it has nothing to do with the question you asked me before, because it's a completely different thing.
Oh, absolutely.
But to follow your train through, employers are already allowed to fire people or to discipline them if they commit a crime of some kind. So that's already allowed in far of all the Fair Work negotiations. This wasn't a crime as far as, like you said, there were 16, 17, that wouldn't be considered a crime.
No, it's not a crime, no.
No, so then I would assume that probably wasn't justified to sack them at all. I wouldn't agree with that being a thing. If no crime was committed, there was no complaint against them for anything that was, like, he didn't hit them or anything, did he?
No, it was...
No, so it's just sex, right? Consensual sex with an adult. Yeah, okay. Then that would be probably available to be challenged for unfair dismissal.
Which I think it is actually going through that process with one of them.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. Which not that there's much to to challenge at the moment because there's no football season, but that's a whole other issue.
Overreach. It's overreach.
Yeah, and look, I guess part of the reason I'm bringing up that as an example as well is there is a lot of political correctness that seems to be seeping into society in general, and there seems to be a lot of things that you can say, you can't say, and it seems to be the smallest thing can upset people. Now, obviously, with more conservative views on Twitter, that can be a challenge. I know we were talking about it a bit before.
You've seen what I post on Twitter?
I have, and that's where I'm leading to. So, how do you deal with that? Because I mean, I've seen, and regardless of whether people agree with you or disagree with you, I've seen some pretty horrendous things and some just horrible things, not only to yourself but other media commentators as well, whenever they're outside of I guess the broader group thing. So why do you choose to deal with that?
Why do I choose to deal with it? For the same reason I got back into politics. I've always, as I said, I've always been a writer. Then I had to do other things to earn a living. I got roped into a family business and went into retail, but writing was always my first priority. And when I started to find out that what I was writing could be policed by these institutions, things like 18C, where if you write something, you can now be taken to court if they don't like it, or you can be deplatformed, or all kinds of crazy things. That's when I started to look into what's happening to speech in this country and this social justice culture. Now, the thing I will say is, particularly cancel culture, and I don't know if you've seen the sleeping giants roaming around trying to get rid of people. All these groupthink, until it gets to legislation, cultural behavior only has the power that you give it. So a company doesn't have to bend to a online trolling pressure group made up of kids in their basement or at a university. They don't have to. If they ignore them, they have absolutely no power whatsoever. They're not going to buy anyone's products. They're not actually causing a physical disturbance in the Australian environment. But when you start to bow again and again, and you've seen so many networks give into the ramblings of these trolls and this cancel culture and social justice warriors, that is when you start to build momentum behind a sensorial movement. And that's essentially what they are. They don't like your opinion, so they try and get rid of you. And usually it's not to do with what you said, it's to do with your politics. So I don't know if you, I often try and show out the hypocrisy of these movements, where you can take almost an identical thing said by two different people of political persuasions, and only one of them will be deplatformed. So they're not grounded morally with their concepts, they're politically motivated, using cancel culture as a silencing tool. And I'm not easy to silence. You can't shut me up, so it doesn't make any difference.
No problem with that.
I mean, they yell at you. What do they expect to happen? Okay, you can yell. I'm just going to scroll past unless they're funny, then I reblog them because I get bored.
Well, so sometimes they use those caps really well. They get their point across. They probably sit there and go, "Ha ha! I showed her. She'll be stewing on that for hours." But no, and cancel culture is becoming such a big thing at the moment. It's it feels as though that every day we're seeing someone who'll say the wrong thing in the wrong way, and even what really amazed me was J.K. Rowling, who is, I don't think there's anyone further left than J.K. Rowling, but obviously there's
Stalin. I mean, that's about as far left.
Oh, I don't know. I think Stalin was probably a little bit more conservative than J.K., but oh dear, sorry.
I really like the Harry Potter books, okay? But it's better that you read them. It's better if you read them without reading any of J.K. Rowling's associated tweets that go with them, because you'll just ruin them.
It does go a bit that way, but it's funny how there seems to be a bit of I guess the left is eating its own substantially at the moment, and I think what's going on in the US, Donald Trump's going to win. I mean, he was probably going to win anyway, but he'll win by more now because the Bernie supporters won't support Biden. Have you noticed that?
I don't understand watching. I've got some of my Twitter friends are far more into American politics than I am. I watch it more like a sideshow. I can't believe that Bernie and Biden and even Elizabeth Warren, that's what they offered up as the counter narrative. That's who they found to run in the whole of America. It's a bit like being left with Malcolm Turnbull. You've got to ask where and how and why.
Don't say the M word. We don't like the M word.
He's the ghost. Yeah, he's a ghost. I know you don't mention the ghost, but it's his week, so.
He's and for those who are, I guess, international, Malcolm Turnbull's the Prime Minister I often joke about was in the wrong political party, and he was further to the left than the actual opposition leader was at the time. It was a bit of a weird dichotomy where
it'd be like if Bernie Sanders ran for the Republicans. That's basically where we're at.
Exactly, yeah. Maybe not quite as bad as Bernie, but or quite as far left as Bernie. I guess whether he's as bad or as good is probably very subjective. I know I was, I certainly wasn't a very active Liberal until after ScoMo came into power, but that's just because I've got a lot of love for ScoMo. He's my guy. So
interestingly,
you don't? Okay.
No, I don't.
Funnily enough, I actually I knew ScoMo before he was ScoMo the PM. So I actually used to go to church with him.
Really?
So that's a bit of an interesting little tidbit that really has.
I got kicked out of Sunday school. I went once and I got kicked out.
Within
I 15 minutes, I was sitting on the lawn outside.
Yep, I had the same experience. Got kicked out of a uniting Sunday school when I was a kid, when my mother decided we should probably go to church. And that was the 1 week that we went to church. Unfortunately for me, I converted later. But yeah, that's okay. It's just, it was probably that interest in history and a lot of that probably dragged me in. So much longer story. But you did mention actually that you have an interest in the historical side of religion. So I guess to move away from the politics for the moment, as far as that goes, is there anything that's, I guess, dragged you into it, or was that because you were trying to fight against the Anglican school, or is it just something you developed?
No, that was just a hobby. I mean, when I get asked to write an essay on something, for me that was an activity. And I got full marks, by the way. They hated me. They actually, I wrote this essay basically disproving, using historical foundation, some of the biblical stories, which was the essay was to prove them. But that was back in the time when the curriculum allowed you to answer the question in the pro or the con. Do you remember that that time when you were allowed to do that in every subject?
Well, I wasn't even aware it had changed. So there you go. So
it's changed now. Now you have to argue the affirmative. So there's no chance to argue a counter narrative in any subject anymore. Anyway, so I got full marks, and they dragged me out into the hallway and into the chaplain's office, and they asked me who my father was, which I thought was hysterical, considering that I wrote the essay, not anybody else. So no, I didn't do it for that reason. It was more to do with my fascination with science fiction, which then led into archaeology. Like, I grew up watching Stargate, which I loved, going to these other worlds and these cultures. And so then I ended up in the culture stream for the ruins and stuff. And then I ended up in ancient history. And so I went back that way through, I loved ancient Egypt like so many kids. And then I got into Greece, and then I just went through. And so I ended up studying religion as an offshoot of studying culture.
Okay.
And I had particular interest in Aboriginal religion because it's one of the oldest documented religions as far as its stories. And so if you're interested in the evolution of religions into each other, the further back you go, the closer you get to the reason that we came up with them. And so back to those very primordial, there's a sun, there's seasons, almost a paganistic kind of view. And so I found it interesting that way to watch how the movement of people across the world could be tracked back to which religions they took bits and pieces out. Because as you conquer, you tend to take that religion or use that religion, incorporating into the new civilization as it builds up. That was all fascinating to me, and often ties closely with the transfer of language between different parts of the world. So that's what I found interesting. It's more, I'm a stories girl. I love fiction, and what is religion but one of the greatest evolutions of fiction? So.
I think, what did Homer Simpson say? God's my favourite fictional character. I appreciate that. I appreciate that one. So how do you find? So I guess how would you find? I guess firstly the Australian atheist movement, or I guess people who are campaigning for atheist issues in Australia. What's your experience there?
The only experience I have with that, which I agree, is keeping religion out of politics, because I know a lot of people who might be Christian who think that they should have more religion in politics, and there are some parties who are like that as well. But they have to remember that whatever door you open for your own religion, you open for every other religion too. And I'm pretty sure that if they sit down and think about that for more than 5 minutes, they'll understand why our essentially founding fathers, both here and overseas, decided that no, we're not going to go down that path. We're going to ensure that citizens are protected from each other as well. So
yeah, well, if you open the door,
that's the only real interaction. Yeah, I mean, the only thing I really did was I went down to the Atheist Convention in Melbourne. Don't know if you heard about that. Back when Christopher Hitchens was a thing, who I miss dearly. And I missed him speaking. He couldn't make it to our event because he was already sick. And I still regret never going to the one beforehand and actually getting to hear him speak live. But I don't know if you saw it on the news. It's still up on YouTube. Outside that event that I was in, there are all the Islamic protesters trying to behead us and shouting things. Did you see all that?
I think I vaguely remember it, yeah, because I think wasn't there a former Muslim speaker there, a former Islamic speaker there, and there was a big uproar about that. Is that the one you're talking about?
Well, it was about, oh God, if Hitchens was still alive, it would have been about 10 years ago, and it was before the whole ISIS thing broke out. Maybe it was longer. But yeah, we had all the placards, and the police, I was shocked to see that our police did nothing, because if you stood out there with a placard without the veil of religion, threatening to kill people and behead them, you'd be arrested. But
absolutely,
they allowed it. And I had a similar experience in Pitt Street. Now, this one you'll remember, when ISIS were walking down the middle of Pitt Street with those behead signs. Do you remember that? It was on the news.
I remember very well, yeah.
So my office was in Pitt Street, and my Premier store was like right in the Pitt Street area there. And I was coming back from doing some shop work down there with the computers, and I was at the Market Street set of light, like at the road there, to cross back in. And the protest came out of nowhere because we weren't warned. No one was told it was coming. And all of a sudden, I came face to face with that dude with the striped hat and the big billboard saying, you know, kill all unbelievers. And I came face to face with him. And there was no police, not a soul. It was just all the Australians standing there, stopping them from coming down Pitt Street, because they wanted to go right down Pitt Street Mall. And we were like, no chance are you going to come down Pitt Street Mall. So I gripped my laptop, and the guy next to me, he gripped his umbrella because it had just been raining. And we were like, right, okay. When that was the closest I've come to proper religious civil disobedience in Australia as a concept. But they all went off to the park after. They sort of turned and went that way, but nothing ever happened to them. There was no, and that was a pretty scary infringement of a religion onto a free society.
Yeah, and that's something that there was a bit of a spate of that. It seems to have calmed down a bit, and I think they identify that some of the leaders of that actually went off.
That guy,
some of the ones that were, they're actually, he was the one who, I think it was, he took his family over, and the family are trying to get back now, but he died fighting over there for ISIS.
But they were all there in a lovely little group. But that was very confronting to see that in the middle of Sydney when you're at work without warning. That was quite confronting.
And there had been a bit of that. Well, I mean, obviously there was the Limp Cafe as well. That was.
Yep, remember that? I had to move staff into our warehouse, and then they came in and they locked our whole building down because they didn't know if there were bombs or anything there. And I had to actually go down to Pitt Street and get all the staff out of the stores because the police, they just weren't doing anything about the shop staff. So we couldn't leave the kids down there in the shops. So we all went back up to the balconies and down to the.
So obviously, being a free speech advocate, how do you reconcile that?
I can say people can say what they like. It's if you actually commit any kind of act. So if you're conducting an illegal protest down the center of the retail sector, not allowed to do that. You have to apply for permits to do that. So they're actually engaging in an act that was not permitted. They want to go and straddle.
I thought that was actually an organised protest. No, there you go.
It was organised. It wasn't allowed.
Okay, so there you go. See, I've learned something new there.
Just because you publish on Facebook doesn't mean you're allowed to do it.
No, I thought they had all the permits because I know City of Sydney probably love things like that, depending on, well, I was going to say depending on who's running the council.
Hi, we're ISIS. We'd like to run down the middle of Pitt Street Mall if we could. No.
This is definitely City of Sydney Council have let some pretty funny things happen.
Yeah.
I think so. Also, not
also, to be clear, with the free speech, I will make one distinction. If you're part of a terrorist organization, I consider that to be an action. So if you're organizing events as part of terror, then you are contributing to actions. But if you want to be a terrorist and just speak, fine. But if you want to go and start interacting and doing things like marches, those are actions. So they can go and as far as I'm concerned, they can go and tweet whatever they want. But as soon as you start taking to the streets, you're you're engaging in more than that, or contributing money, which is what they all do. Those are all actions.
So I guess getting back to I guess the atheist community at large in Australia, and then I guess we'll move on to international. It is a big community, and how do you think it is? And considering, look, when I was in church leadership, I think the statistics we had in the church was 10% of people in Australia are church-going Christians. So obviously, there's it would be fair to assume, and I know that the census has non-religious as the largest, but not the majority.
I ticked Jedi. Did you do that? I definitely ticked Jedi.
I did that a couple ago.
That was great.
When was Jedi the big one? That was wasn't the last census. I think the one before.
No, it was about 5 years ago. It was brilliant.
I know it's now technically a legally recognised religion in Australia, which I think is just wonderful. But I haven't been able to get any tax breaks for it yet. But I guess obviously the majority of people realistically in Australia are non-believers or certainly non-churchgoers. But the representation doesn't seem to be there, and the voice doesn't seem to be there. And one of the issues I've had, things like the secular party are basically an offshoot of the Greens. So
there's a good reason for that. Why would you have a representation for a negative? Do you know what I mean? Like, there are very few people like Christopher Hitchens. Well, it's an absence of people like Christopher Hitchens. They weren't out trying to turn people into atheists. That wasn't why he was out speaking. He was trying to address some of the ills or dangers of particular religions that they were currently engaging in, to almost reform them. That was more what he was about. There's no point running around trying to run, as I said, political parties shouldn't be focusing on people's internal spiritual positions. It should be about their policies for law in order to solve problems that people have in their communities, not worrying about which God they do or do not pray to. So that would be, and I think a lot of atheists understand that, because they're not tied up and so concerned and spending a lot of thought about gods and no gods. They're not going to run a platform on that. They would join whatever their political affiliation is. And in this case, conservative parties are by and large already irreligious to start with, so they'd probably naturally go towards a conservative party rather than try and start up one.
Although there is a I guess not necessarily, because I think the secular party is just one of those minor fringe parties that the Greens like to prop up to, or they used to like to prop up to get their
votes and preferences, isn't it? Having a lot of those little parties around.
Pretty much. Yeah. But I guess as far as even let's say the Atheist Foundation of Australia, which is, I guess, touts itself as the official atheist group, or the official atheist lobby group. From what I can see, it's their content is basically Scott Morrison bad, Anthony Albanese good.
Well, this is what I find hysterical. I mean, a religion might have opinions on different types of politics. It's like, it'll take Islam, because it's the most obvious political religion there is.
Yeah.
Islam takes political positions because it's part of their religion. But being irreligious or secular says absolutely nothing about a person except they don't believe in God or a concept of God. It doesn't have anything to say about their politics. It doesn't have anything to say about their philosophy. Nothing. It just says, nope, don't believe. But a lot of these organizations that are atheist organizations, they try and attach political persuasions or philosophical persuasions to the concept of atheism. And it's just not there. There's something else. They're not, for example, Marxists tend to be atheists. Okay, but Marxism is its own political persuasion. It has nothing to do with your atheism. You've just decided that you are a Marxist atheist. It's not a combined thing. So when you've got Greens parties, people building their political parties, they're not doing it based upon being an atheist. They're doing it based upon their other political persuasions and then trying to draw people in on that card. But honestly, I don't think that atheism has anything at all to say about politics or philosophy. It's just
you don't think it's got a place, I guess, where to defend the rights of people who don't believe, I guess.
No, that's a philosophy. That's philosophy. So if you want to defend speech and things, that's part of a philosophical persuasion. Okay. Atheism is literally nope, no gods. That's the end of that atheist discussion. But then everybody else, as I said, people tend to need philosophy, politics, or religion. So people will always fill that gap with some other persuasion.
Well, I guess then to put it to a philosophical point of view, humanism.
Exactly. I'm a secular humanist. So yep. I will act.
So I guess is there a space for representation for secular humanists?
No, I am worried about, as far as politics goes, I look at a problem and work out what the best solution to that problem is based upon the community, the problem itself, and the options available. At no point do I think, as a humanist or as an atheist, we should do. I don't think that people who are drafting laws should be accessing that. They should be looking at the problems at hand and how to solve them.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly as most of them are monetary.
Yeah, well, that's true. I'll give you that one. And look, that's probably one we'll disagree. I think there is a place for atheism or atheist representation within politics.
Well, we had Julie Gillard. She was atheist, but it didn't affect her. She's an example on the left of someone who did not carry religion, but was in power, considered position. She's the ex-prime minister as well. But again, she didn't bring atheism into. I didn't like her at all, but she never really brought it in. Didn't reference it.
But interestingly enough, in her book, she said one of the reasons that that she hadn't originally contested for leadership when Rudd was, or when Rudd won, was because she didn't think that Australia was ready for an atheist prime minister.
Yeah, that was a pretty strong misjudging on her part. I think probably because we're coming from the Labor Party, which is either heavily Catholic from the old Irish roots, or it's part of this green global warming style cultish thing that's going on. So I think she misjudged that. Most people in Australia are not obsessed about what religion they are or not. I've never seen conservatives come and go, I wish you were more Christian when you're running. They're more interested in what their actual policies are. Yeah,
and that's actually, that sort of brings a very good point. It's sort of there's a lack of, I guess, caring, as much as the religious side of things. How do you find that? I guess what are your thoughts on, and I know we touched on this a little bit earlier, the way that religious groups and some religious groups will try and, I guess, creep into politics. I know there's a bit of a move within right-wing parties at the moment where essentially we're seeing the death of things like the Christian Democrats. Family First is now a non-entity with the Conservative Party going, and there's been a bit of a push to, I guess, move into the larger parties. What are your thoughts on that there when people with an obvious religious intent are getting involved and trying to legislate?
So I've observed, I go to a lot of Liberal Conservative Party events, not just of the Liberals, but of different Conservative parties. And I've observed among their followers, who are most likely to be involved in the party politics, that they don't like religion being a topic of conversation inside the political sphere. So they don't mind the religion of the people who are candidates. They don't care. I mean, they don't mind if they're Pentecostal or Buddhist, or they just don't care. What they seem to shy away from is when that becomes a major topic of the conversation or used as part of an explanation for one of their policies. So when I was looking at the Australian Conservative Party, one of the reasons they had trouble growing or getting membership or even getting people to vote for them was because they focused so heavily on the religious section of their party. And I sat through quite a few of their speeches, and even though I agree with a lot of their politics, their reasoning behind how they get to things bothered me a lot. It bothers me a lot. And a lot of those people who would naturally be drawn to those minor parties which you talk about end up going and joining One Nation because they're political, they're not religious. So they cover the same political spectrum, but they will not go and delve into people's individual religions. They leave that up to their followers and they don't make a thing of it. That seems to be the standard, the default of most westernized. Anybody came from England and then became a culture, brought that distrust of religion being in politics from our heritage. It's very hard to separate yourself. The only reason America is different was because of who colonized America. But in most other, which you can't get away from the fact that has come all the way down. But even their founding fathers tried to separate it out. They even stopped where they're like, nope, we have to make sure that we keep this separate or we'll know it'll all go horribly, horribly wrong. And so I just don't think there seems to be a natural aversion to it as a general concept. They just don't like, as voters, don't want to hear it. They want to hear politics from their politicians and religion from their pastors. Mm-hmm. They keep that divide. They don't mind either, but they want them in separate spheres. So does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, actually, I think it answers it pretty well. I probably wouldn't disagree. Actually, I definitely wouldn't disagree with that. Although then you do look at, I guess, things like the US, and can you imagine? I mean, look, Donald Trump. There is no way that guy is a hardcore fundamentalist Christian.
No, he's not. He really isn't.
Let's not kid ourselves. But for him to actually progress politically, he's got to surround himself with those people, and a lot of the fundamentalists are holding prayer meetings, and you sort of see him as people are standing there praying for him, and he's kind of got his eyes open and almost this little smirk on his face. But he's had to go down that path and had to portray that and in order to, I guess, consolidate that base. What are your thoughts on something like that?
Well, I have come to the conclusion that although we are all conservatives and we come from different countries around the world, I have a lot of conservatives in different countries. There are some parts of a culture of a country that will always be different to the country that you come to. And those are based upon the historical peculiarities of those countries. So let's take guns and the US. It's one of the easiest things to talk about as far as a difference in cultural opinion en masse. So we got rid of our guns, and there was overwhelming support. There still is overwhelming support. You can disagree or not agree with it. The actual nation of Australia is like, yeah, we're okay with not having guns. And that is because we were never subject to internal revolutions. We never had to fight for our freedom. So when you talk about America, guns are linked to their concept of freedom. So we share across the pond the idea of freedom and the following of freedom, but we have a different interpretation of some of those follow-on laws because of what happened historically. Now that difference will never change, and you can't copy and paste those politics to each system because you can't change history.
No, of course.
So, I mean, if we had a revolution here, then you might see that we change our mind, but it would take an historical event in order to do that. I find religion and politics in the US very similar because of their birth and 100 years, more than a century of their actual political development with religion. They will always have that as part of their nationalistic view about being Americans. Doesn't matter if they're on the left or the right, they both tend to be quite religious, both sides. But we Australians came from that time in England when we were getting away from that. We were free settlers. We were pioneers and explorers of a very harsh land, and we developed a different type of culture entirely. We tended to ditch religion quite early as a population majority because we just had a different experience with the world, and we were separated from our churches and institutions by and large off on the bottom of the globe. So
in fact, if you ever get the opportunity, and I know it certainly gave me a laugh when I found out, Federation, the big Federation celebration, they had a big march through Sydney with all these commemorative arches. So that was so they had this huge march. That was our big revolution, and we're our own country. All these arches, and apparently half of them ended up catching on fire because they were just like these flimsy sort of wooden things that were temporary structures. And if you ever get the chance, have a look at that. But yeah, look, I guess getting to it, we do have a very different experience here in Australia. I know
it's just different.
Yeah, it's when people in the US find out that I'm politically on the right and I'm not pro guns, they sort of look at me as if I'm like this strange alien creature. And I personally think US politics is unique. There is nowhere in the world that does politics like the US. But it's an interesting dynamic. How do you think, and I know we kind of did touch on this before, but do you think if someone was very much an out and proud and vocal atheist, could they be elected as Prime Minister in Australia at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always believed that your politics, and if you are truly considering yourself to be a servant of the people and you have good ideas that are implementable, not just this random blue sky stuff on the back of a napkin, but actual solutions that will help improve people's lives, then they will vote for you. They won't care what your religious affiliation is, as long as you have the right idea to move the country forward, and to, especially now, anyone who comes out now with a platform of reliable baseload cheap energy and fixing up the Fair Work legislation so that we can redo our manufacturing industry, they're going to, and reducing taxation considerably, getting rid of red tape, making it easier to get council approvals, they're going to be the ones who get voted for. They're not going to care if they're religious or atheist or green or from Mars. They won't care.
Well, yeah, you'd hope they're the ones who get voted for. It's not always the case.
But they're not going to stand up, because I can tell you now, that's not what's going to happen. We're going to have two major parties who just don't have no idea how to fix our serious problems that they've got us into. None.
So what would you do if you could, I guess, to move Australia forward? Obviously, keeping in mind we're in a very unique time at the moment. What steps do you think we can use to take Australia to improve Australia?
Economically? I'm guessing. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
As I said, the same thing, that we've got to do something about our terrible energy grid, because we've got ailing and dying baseload energy that has to be replaced and should be replaced by nuclear energy and cheap coal-fired power, both of them. But nuclear is the most sensible solution for a country like Australia. It's crazy that it's not, but I've read the legislation regarding the handling of our current nuclear power plant, and it's all set up to be changed when required. So cheap, reliable baseload energy, we cannot have our energy base reliant on China building us windmills and solar panels that have to be replaced every 15 years.
I think at the moment, I think considering what's going on in the world, I don't think China should be building anything for us.
No, not only is it
maybe they can give things, but
forgetting the fact that it's an environmental disaster and it doesn't provide you with anything useful as far as energy, that is a geopolitical nightmare to leave your entire energy sector reliant on a foreign communist power. Who thought that was a good idea? They also have pretty big holdings in our energy companies as it is. So fix that. You have to do something about Fair Work. I have automated payroll systems for the retail sector, so I've been through at least one award in very high level detail, which is frustrating. They have to do something about it. Simplify it so that people can pay and negotiate contracts with clarity, and they need to give people freedom to pay people less for true entry-level jobs. So you've got Newstart. Why aren't there factories allowed to open up with the same kind of pay as Newstart, but with the addition of, well, we'll give you leave and we'll give you the opportunities if you're there for 2 years or whatever, you then get to have, standard increases. Like, why don't, and also they should raise Newstart a little bit. Newstart has been too low for too long. It should be a livable level, but so just assume it's at a proper level.
I think it'll be interesting to see what happens after the 550 bonus everyone's getting a fortnight.
No, but so Newstart should be at a proper level, and then the factories should be allowed to compete on that level so people can work in entry-level jobs and we can get our manufacturing industry back. And you couldn't say that it's unfair, because it is a wage that people can live off to begin with, but they get benefits. I mean, I'd be happy to give people, say someone had some bad tax marks against their name or some minor infringements, I'd be happy to say, if you did 5 years working in one of these jobs, we'll clear it. I mean, there should be some ideas of how to give people roads back to prosperity if they really want them. There's nothing. We've forgotten how to do that.
And then we get an industry that is going to generate money in Australia for Australians, keep the economy flowing. Fairly simple.
We've got all of our minerals and resources here. We have a food bowl, and yet we don't build water infrastructure. Now that it's raining, no one's talking about doing anything about the dams up here or the pipes. Nothing. They've just gone, great, we don't have to worry about that. It's raining, it's off our problem. Yeah. I've got an old poster from
until the next time
Federation about how bad the dams are, and they've not built anything since then. Nothing.
Yeah. Doesn't surprise me at all. Now we are coming up to the to the hour. So I guess for those who, so we'll start to wrap it up. For those who don't follow you but would like to follow you, where can they find you?
They can follow me on Twitter. I have a political blog there. I also have a YouTube channel, but honestly, it's just science fiction music vids. It's not. Don't follow me there. Follow me on Twitter.
You'll probably get more people from the science fiction stuff. We've been known to be a nerdy community.
Yeah, well, I'm a writer. As I said, I'm a writer. I generally used to write just fanfic before I started doing political writing. So that's how most people know me. I was a fandom queen for 20 years.
So you mentioned Stargate. What else do you like?
Oh, Battlestar Galactica. Did a bit of Game of Thrones recently. Pretty much anything that was in that sci-fi sanctuary, anything in that sci-fi run, I've done. Except I'm not a Star Trekker and I'm not Star Wars. I'm everything but those two. Yeah.
Fair enough.
I'm a Stargater. It's like a very specific. You You won all of those three.
Did you ever see Babylon 5?
No, I didn't.
You know,
my first show was MacGyver. Like, I started on MacGyver, then moved to Stargate. That's how that's my earliest memories of being a little kid, was watching that on the. I think it might have ruined me. That set me on a path to nowhere.
So what kind of stuff have you got on the? So you mentioned sci-fi music videos. Tell me about that.
Yeah, yes. I used to. Oh, Doctor Who. I used to muddle around. I love editing and video software and music. So it used to let me. It just was a way of creating things. Now they're all cracking down on it. The censorship of the internet's out of control.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you're not wrong. And I guess for people who, because I've actually seen a couple of people in the chat, and look, apologies to everyone in the chat. I am trying to keep up with it all, but I have missed most of the thing. But I did see there's a few people who I recognise who are regulars of mine who said that they would be interested in following you. I've had someone who's asked for the Twitter link. So if you go into the actually, no, I haven't put your Twitter link in. I will put the Twitter link in. So I do apologise. Well, hang on, did I put it in? It might actually be in the description. So
basically, I'm on Twitter.
Yeah, I've got the blog in there, and I've got where people can financially support you. I think it's buy a coffee. So I definitely encourage you to do that.
Thank you very much. Poor farmer. I have to thank, if anyone's watching for Twitter, thank you guys, because it helped me to buy water for my cattle last through the drought. So that was really, really appreciated. We had years of drought.
So how have you actually gone with the drought? Because I think everyone's sort of suddenly forgotten the drought, and I think it was only yesterday that we had all the bushfires happening as well, and I think that's sort of, with what's going on in the world at the moment, become a bit of an afterthought.
It took all our money to get our cows through, because we had to feed them and buy water, and then we got a water delivery that actually made us ill, because we were drinking it too. Like, I was showering up the beach in the freezing cold water because there was nothing. It was just for ages.
Yeah.
And the government didn't help, and no one I know has had any help from the government. So we all just had to basically, we drove ourselves to the ground, and just as we were about to start selling again at the markets, this happened, because my brother makes alcohol. He now makes hand sanitizer. You should put the link to my brother's hand sanitizer there.
Absolutely, yeah. If you want to put the link out, we'll get it out there.
We sell to hospitals and things, because we have one of the highest grade ones around, and but losing the markets just after having no water and no food. And then my other job is in retail, so of course that is gone. There's no fashion retail anymore. Yeah. So it's pretty hard time at the moment, to be honest. It's not easy. It's just been like 4 years of really difficult financial hell going on, and for so many Australians. Just do you think
there's a path forward for you once this is all over, or?
To be honest, this is one of the first times that I am not sure what to do, because it will really depend on how long we stay in lockdown and how well the retail industry recovers. And I hear the conversations the CEOs of some of the big companies are having, and they do not match even remotely what the commentators think is going to happen or what the politicians imagine is going to happen. They're so far removed from the reality of discussions with these big 500 shop companies. They have no idea what they're doing or what is really going to happen to them. And so I know
the feeling is within the business community. I know the feeling is definitely that the way we do business will change. Retail especially. Retail shops will basically become pickup points, because it will, if they aren't already.
It's not the problem in the US, so your US followers won't understand, but postage in Australia kills all web store based enterprises. It turns them into effectively a marketing exercise, because you can't make a margin for retail or for a web store. So when you get the Prime Minister stand up and say, hey guys, just use your web stores, all the retailers are like, I've got 540 shops, one web store doing a 70% downturn trade, and it makes no money when it's doing well. So how am I supposed to keep myself alive with my terrible little? You can't. You might as well throw the product onto the road.
Example of that. It's I had a comic book store, so for me so which I still have online.
Proper geek.
You'd probably like what I've got then. We'll definitely have a chat about it. But for me to actually sell a comic to someone in Australia, it was cheaper for them to buy it from the US and have it shipped out than it was for me to provide
Don't get me started on region locking for books and comics as well. That is the worst. I can't believe that they still engage region locking for products you want to buy online. As far as, have you seen that? We want to buy a book and you can't buy it for 8 months until it gets to Australia. So even though you could buy it if you lived in America, you can't buy it here.
I think that's pretty much. I thought that pretty much died down now.
No. So for science fiction books particularly, it's really bad. It nearly sent one of the bookstores over here out of business where they couldn't get the books.
Wow.
On a huge delay.
I'm amazed that bookstores are still. And sorry, we're going a little bit over. So if you do need to go,
sorry guys.
No, that's okay. If you need to go, just let me know. But
where am I going to go?
I don't know. Probably the same place as I am. We're stuck. We're locked in. But yeah, it's bookstores in particular. I see the comic stores. We were lucky in Amazon don't sell to Australia. If Amazon was selling to Australia, game over. But they don't. So we were lucky there. But bookstores having to compete, I don't know how they do it. It's the cost of doing retail in Australia is so insanely high. But even if you're trying to ship it out, where you don't have that relationship with the customer, I mean, people aren't going, as much as they want to support it, they're not going to pay almost double the price. At
least you don't have the problem when you're in a retail industry and we sold shoes, okay? And so what they do to us is people would go and order 6 pairs of shoes or 7 pairs of shoes, and then they'd return them all. And as soon as you've returned a product to a web store, that store has lost everything because they have to pay postage both ways. If you give the wrong address and you're not home for a delivery, the company you bought it from pays for that. So some of these people, they're not there for their delivery, or they give the wrong address. It's 3 or 4 deliveries. By that stage, it's actually costing a company in Australia to send you products. Yep. And that's why the web stores don't work. So it's just so infuriating to hear people talking about web stores like the way forward. You're going, you can't have web stores as the way forward unless you do something about our shipping costs, because they're not going to. Your shops aren't going to be there. You will go back to coffee in Westfield and you'll just have boarded up shops by the time this thing is done.
Well, I mean, in the area that I'm in, so which is Wollongong. I don't know if you're familiar with Wollongong at all.
Yeah, I'm a mid-north coast girl.
Okay, cool. So Wollongong, the main street of Wollongong at the moment, Crown Street Mall, there, I think it's something like 35% of the shops are closed, empty, vacant. And that's before all this happened. That's before we were dealing with bushfires, that nasty disease whose name we shan't speak on YouTube. Before that, so that's which has been a massive issue. I know from a business perspective, we've been looking at ways to try and get more businesses in, but you're forever running into bureaucracy.
Oh, and that's before you get to the sale. Once the Americans, I love you guys, but we try to import your sale events on top of our own sale events. And I warned everyone that would kill Boxing Day sales if we started bringing in Black Friday and everything. And it did. It just killed, because America doesn't have our sale events. They've only got their sale events, but we put in both, and they've got Click Frenzy and they've got forced Westfield sale events as well. It's just, you're always on sale, so you're never earning a real margin on your product. And
yeah, but the problem is from a retail point of view, you have to, because you're competing with those American businesses. And look, I guess probably the one benefit we might have at the moment is the Australian dollar not being as strong as it was 12 months ago. It does make it a little bit more expensive to buy things from the US, but also by the same token, it makes it more expensive to import things if they're not locally made. So
why aren't we on the phone constantly to all of our actual friends and allies trying to replace China with our trade arrangements? Why aren't we dealing with our American friends and trying to give them what they require as far as raw elements in exchange for, I don't know, medicine production, which they're getting really good at now. They've decided they're not doing that in China anymore. We've got so many friends in the world. People say you can't replace China. I say, why not? We've had...
China's going to be replaced because, I mean, the cost of living in China is going up. They're not the impoverished nation they once were, and their cost of living will go up. And then it'll be other areas like, I think they're saying Vietnam's the next manufacturing hotspot. But why are we looking at these other places? Why don't we just bring it back to Australia? Why can't we say, okay, yes, we've got the highest, but we've got the highest minimum wage in the world. As an employer, that means I can't employ people.
We pay too much tax too. Like, employers can't pay their employees more because they pay the government too much. So an example would be payroll tax. I've got companies who pay, 3 staff people's worth of payroll tax to the government. Well, if the government, which is a tax, by the way, for your American friends, the payroll tax is not supposed to exist. It was meant to be taken away when we got given another tax. They put the new tax in and kept payroll tax. And so now we're basically employing public servants by paying this amount of payroll tax instead of giving the workers more of a break and being more profitable as businesses. Everything is just, it's so much double dipping. We make alcohol. You should see the tax on the production of alcohol. It's insanity. I mean, the government is almost stopping people from being productive.
Just a real quick, my wife, if you're listening, Cara is in the room. Okay. So sorry, my daughter
is that a small thing or a puppy?
It's a small little mini version of me. So, well, actually not a mini version of me, but she was about. I try and keep her off, or keep the kids off camera, you know. But she was running with her.
I'm panicking that. I worry that I'm going to have like a puppy dog race through because it's got boundary issues. It just, you know, it's learned how to open doors.
One of the reasons I had to move in here was I was doing things from my lounge room for a while, and my dog doesn't understand camera etiquette and decided to jump up on the lounge and do whatever he wanted to do and put on a really good show for everyone who was watching. But certainly wasn't the best thing. But no, animals are great. We love animals. I just don't want the kids on camera. So,
did you have any final questions for me that you're curious about? I mean,
well, I think looking at the time, I guess if there's anything in the, I don't know if anyone had any questions in the chat.
If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I think there was a free speech one that I missed earlier, and I think it was hang on, let me see if I can find it. It was to do with I don't want to say the word on camera because I think it would get me demonetized. But the event that happened during the Second World War that in camps. Would you advocate, or would you say that denial of that in free speech is okay?
I think people can say whatever they want, because the bad, everyone has always said this, bad ideas die in the light. So people who say false things are not the problem. It's the inability to counteract bad ideas that's the problem. So censorship in itself is what actually allows bad ideas to propagate, because you lose the ability to counteract. I mean, if you go and look at society as a whole, there is so much that's incorrect or wrong or conspiracy. It's part of our civilization. I mean, every human being has the right to say what they like, even if it's total rubbish, you know, or nasty, or they're allowed to say what they like. So, I mean, I love those kids who do the Russian alien spacecrafts in Antarctic. I think they're great fun. I steal some of that stuff for my fanfics. It's great. Is it correct? No. Does it matter? No. Can you have a fun chat about it? Sure. Even the serious points of history, we all feel, I know exactly what you're alluding to, I'm sure everybody else does. We feel closer to that because it's still within living memory. But if you were to take that example for any other atrocity in war, you'd think it was absolutely bizarre that you would try and criminalize denying random pieces of our history. It's no different. It's just that people have personal connections to it. And by all means, get up and every time you see it, counter it. Inundate people. What will happen is every time someone wanders onto that view and they see pages of people telling them how wrong they are and this is exactly how, you more than likely you actually educate a whole bunch of people who might have otherwise agreed with it. Which is the answer to like it.
We're losing you a bit here, actually.
You can probably say.
Yeah, have we got you? Sorry, you're dropping in and out. It's sort of freezing up. Okay, I'm hoping it's not my internet. What I might do with the freezer. Oh, there we go. There you are. Hang on.
Because you'll lose NBN here.
So let's not talk about the NBN. No, sorry.
Straight away.
No, I've lost you again. Oh, this is good fun. I love it when the internet does this. This is the joys of doing something live, where the internet it's either really good in Australia or it's really bad in Australia, depending on where you are. I'm very fortunate. I've got what's called fibre to the premises here, so I've got technically what's the fastest. It's just my computer doesn't always match it. So Obviously, Alexandra mentioned she's on a farm, so sometimes in the more rural areas it can drop out, although I think we've got you back.
You do have me back.
Fantastic. I was just talking about the wondrous internet that we've got here in this country.
Don't even go there.
I think that's one that we'll probably agree on. So,
I remember the infinite load signs on my downloads. You remember they say ETA forever. We don't know when you're going to get that. Just
Yep. I remember that. I remember it only too well. Well, look, what we might do, we might wrap it up there. So look, all the links. So the link for Twitter is in the description there. Like I said, help and support. There's the link to buy a coffee. I think it's like a $3 donation. Buy a coffee for Alexandra. Everything helps, especially when you're a content creator or you're trying to, I guess, take the next step. And obviously, as you mentioned, writing is your passion, and I certainly hope that we get to see more of it, because the content that you put out I actually quite like. So I definitely, not that you need my encouragement, but I certainly would encourage you to do that. And look, thanks. I know there's a few people who are in the chat who I've sort of seen who have been here since the start. So thanks for joining us. And yeah, is there anything I guess you'd like to finish with?
thank you for having me.
No, absolute pleasure. All right, thanks everyone for coming, and we'll end the stream there, and I'll see you all tomorrow night for Friday Night Six Pack.